Okay, welcome. I am really excited. This is the first time we've done a panel for Tutors Learning Network, and it's probably going to be one of the most important ones of 2021. So, welcome. I'm going to be keeping an eye on the live, so if you have any questions as we go through, please do pop them into the chat. If you're watching this afterwards, then please pop them into the chat because we're going to be watching after that as well. So, just a quick introduction to everybody. I am Holly. I run the Tutors Learning Network alongside Jay, but I also run TeachAllAboutIt, and I'm here with my tutor's hat on. We have Claire of Rose Consultancy, and we also have Jemma of the Education Hotel, who was just below me. So I'm going to start off by doing a little bit of an introduction of why we're here, just to start off. First of all, the reason why we're doing this is purely to try to give a little bit of information, because all of us have had lots of questions from other tutors, from parents, and even from candidates as well, who really don't know what's happening at this particular point, and we wanted to try and give as much information as we can possibly give you. There needs to be a caveat at this point of we can only tell you what we know, and things may well change. Without further ado, one thing that you can do to obviously engage with what we're doing is to have a look on the Tutors Learning Network website. We do have a blog, and on that blog you'll see there it is the assessment of exam qualifications, and what we are trying to do is to break that down into language which is accessible. There are links on there to the Department of Education, to Ofqual, and also to the exam boards. So please do have a read of that, and from there, let's start off by getting you to introduce yourselves. So, Jemma, do you want to start and tell us who you are, what you do?
Hi, I'm Jemma. I run the Education Hotel. This will be my first year assessing. So last year I watched kind of in horror as many private candidates really struggled to get grades. So after that was over, I reached out to an exam centre and said I want to be a learning partner because I want to try and stop it happening again. And now we're back in this position. So this is my first time going through it. And as such, I suppose I'm the newbie to it. So I'm at the stage a lot of tutors are at the moment as well, where we're not quite sure what we're doing, or we've got processes. I run the Education Hotel. The Education Hotel's process has been approved for our own candidates with our exam centre, which is Tutors and Exams. But beyond that, my knowledge is maybe less than both Holly and Claire. So I'm coming in as the slightly uncertain one to maybe ask some of those questions that you might all be feeling, and generally to probe a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really nice to have people who are going through this for the first time, and actually being able to ask those questions that maybe other people want to ask, but they feel a little bit strange about asking because they've been tutoring for a long time. I mean, ultimately, although Claire and I went through this last year, it's still a process that's changing so quickly, that I think this year does feel like we're going through it again for the first time. So Claire, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, so I'm Claire Rose. I run Rose Education Consultancy, and for the past few years I've been working with a lot of different private assessment centres and schools to help with private candidates. So in various different ways, which you'll see in a moment as I go through the slides. I'm going to apologise in advance. These slides were kind of put together really quickly this afternoon. And so a lot of the information, there's perhaps too much information. So I'm not going to read the slides out to you, I hope. So if you want to pause the video at any point and kind of read in detail, I thought it was best to give more information, particularly because there's been a lot of tutors asking me what's my process for this year for my candidates. So that's why this session is aimed primarily at them. But at the same time, we thought, well, we'll open it up to parents and students as well, so that you can kind of see what's going on behind the scenes amongst your tutors.
Absolutely, yeah. So ultimately we don't want to be keeping anything secret. This is no big sort of conspiracy. We want to share everything we possibly have, even if at some points that doesn't feel like very much. However, that said, moving on. So what I thought we would do to start off with, I'm going to share what I've published on my website, and we're going to move over into Claire's slides. You'll see that there is a difference between them. These are both approved processes, and we're also going to go onto Education Hotel website as well, so you can see that there is something which is essentially sort of, you can see that everything sort of uses essentially the same process, but they're all works in progress. Okay, so moving over, I'm just making sure you can actually see everything. I have a little bit on here for our tutor assessed grades. These are published, so by having them on the website, everybody can see them. And our assessment process essentially uses the idea of what we did last year, which was to take in evidence. Now for our current students, that's much easier because we have had potentially 6 months, maybe even 2 years worth of evidence of whatever it is that they're studying. That may well be their GCSE, it could be their A-level. For those we don't know, it's important to be aware that that process may well change. So we have said that our understanding as it is right now will be a minimum of 5 pieces of assessed work, and we have put together a set of what we would be classifying as mock exams, although we're not calling them mock exams, we are calling them online assessments. However, they will be done in exam conditions. So that is our current process, and one of the reasons we've put those exams in there is because we need to evidence that the students who are working with us, it is definitely their work. So if we've seen you do it, then there's just no arguing that it's theirs. So that's us. We have some bullet points that have been improved, and that goes for our international students as well. Okay, so Claire, I'm going to move over to yours because you have started off with some disclaimers.
I thought it was quite important to get these points across. First of all, just to say that the process and for all candidates, so that's those in school as well as those out of school, has not been finalised yet. So I work in a school for a couple of days a week, and even there we don't know what the details are yet because the exam boards have not released them. So everything is still up in the air a little bit in terms of the exact assessment materials that they'll be releasing, for instance, or in terms of what exam boards will want from private candidates. We're still not 100% sure. So we kind of just have to be flexible. But also, I'm hoping that will reassure private candidates a little bit that just because you're a private candidate doesn't mean that's the reason that you don't know what's going on. No candidate knows what's going on.
Yes, there's parity in terms of the lack of information.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we've been asked a lot, whether that's been in our group or sort of wider community, has been when we're expecting to actually get that information from the exam board. I have an inkling that it's going to be over Easter, but it might be later. I don't know.
Now I can answer that because I had a quick look today, and a couple of exam boards have said by the end of March further details will be released. So the actual assessment materials, I think they said by Easter that they'll be released for schools and centres to use. But they have said further details on the process, particularly for private candidates, by the end of March.
Okay, so by the end of March, we're looking by Easter. By Easter weekend, we should have that.
Earlier than last year, I think. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be earlier than last year, so it won't be quite the same rush.
I also wanted to point out that we're not assessment centres, so the Education Hotel, Rose Consultancy and TeachAllAboutIt. We have worked in schools as teachers, head of departments, exams officers, etc. And we've also worked with exam assessment centres. So, for example, with Rose Consultancy, we do a lot of work with non-examined assessment and authentication, that kind of thing. It's really important that you, as a tutor or as a student, refer to the centre that you're working with in the first instance. So if that's a school or a college or a private exam centre, as a tutor, I'd be reaching out to them now saying, I'm working with this candidate, introduce yourself, send over your experience, your information. Last year, there was kind of a hesitancy to use private tutors, and I thought that was a terrible shame, particularly when that private tutor happens to be a teacher as well, working in a school, or happens to be an examiner in a lot of cases. So rather than just a blank cut-off, just introduce yourself and say, and hopefully we'll work together. This session that we're running today is obviously aimed at tutors, but we have had, like I said, parents and sometimes quite tearful candidates on the phone over the past few weeks. So I'm hoping that this will reassure them a bit. And just to say, we don't have any inside information between the three of us.
Wish we did.
Oh, absolutely.
And if we did, we couldn't share it with you anyway. So
no. However,
officially released. And just to say, we have questions too about the process, which you'll see as I go through it. So this is the proposed process from my company, Rose Education Consultancy. We do a lot of services, but the ones that are kind of relevant. We run teacher training workshops in schools, particularly about moderation, and we run student workshops on exam revision and things like that, and how to please the examiners. We also do GCSE and coursework authentication, which means that we already have a process of working with private candidates to assess a grade, even though that's for NEA usually. And there's also, we offer one-to-one consultancy for school leaders. So last year, for instance, when private candidates, when the process came out and of course said there won't be a process, I did have a lot of one-to-one work with heads of centres, including a lot of head teachers from different schools. Their circumstances differed. Some only had one or two private candidates, and they said they were really keen to say, how can we include them? The biggest stumbling block last year was the ranking system. That's gone this year. So hopefully that schools and colleges will find it a little bit easier. But also, Ofqual have explicitly said this year that private candidates should work with schools and colleges as well.
Absolutely. So we have, obviously, we now know that there's no ranking system. That gives us another little insight into knowing that there is definitely no algorithm sitting behind this. They're not going to be taking our grades and then kind of shuffling them into order and pushing you up or down based upon anything other than the evidence that you're providing.
It's reassuring. In terms of the private candidates that we work with, I say private candidates, but we kind of know them. So at the moment, our process for assessing existing private candidates that we work with, we work a little bit with homeschooling families, but mostly with my company in comparison to Jemma, who I think does work with a lot of homeschooling families. Ours are mostly other educated learners. So people like adult learners, professional athletes, footballers, like professional sporting organisations. So for any reason why a candidate is not in school full time, for any reason whatsoever, then we work with them. And a lot of the time it's not direct tutoring, although they do have tutors and they do have teachers occasionally. But the thing is that we know the students and we've assessed their work so far and we've been working with them. All of the tutors and or mentors that we have been working with them throughout the year, at least if it's GCSE or AS level. So we know those candidates. So we're kind of treating them similar to a teacher or a school would, in the sense that we know what they've been taught for a start. We know what's been covered by them in terms of the curriculum and the syllabus. So they're quite straightforward, and we're treating them very similarly to how we would as if we were a school.
So you know your students really well. Jemma, you're working with home educated students. Do you see them regularly? Are you actually having that one-to-one tuition with them, or are you taking on additional people?
What do you mean by additional people?
So taking on, so we're getting lots of queries at the moment from home educated students who have potentially been taught by their parents who then
Yeah.
need to have a tutor assess grade from somebody who clearly is not sort of has that family attachment?
So at the moment, no, because they're not our current students. And when I looked at it, it's something that's kind of still in discussion. But for us, unless we have taught them for a certain number of hours, I wouldn't feel comfortable giving that first piece. I think that all of us have, which is that evidence, or that summary of what they've been doing. And that's something that that takes a little bit of time to get used to when you're one-to-one tutoring. So at the moment, our process is approved for our current students, but we have had people who are getting hold of us who are wanting to know, can we just assess them? Can we just put them through an exam? What can we do? And actually, that's one of the things that we've held back on, purely because we want to be really confident with the grades that we are giving. And whilst we can do that for the current students that we have, we see them each week. For somebody who is coming to us new at this point, that's something where at the moment what we're saying to them is look, definitely you can be a private candidate with an exam centre, and the exam centre will then recommend what they would do if you are a independent private candidate. If you are looking to receive tuition, then we can of course provide that tuition, but we do require it to be happening for a while before we're going to essentially say you're our student.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't be ethical of us to take somebody on for 2 lessons and then to say that we can therefore accurately assess their grade.
Yeah, absolutely. We're kind of sat on that sort of left field side, very, very similar to you, working with lots of home educated students, or I work with a lot of private candidates who are educated outside of school because of SEN. So for our students that we've been seeing for a long time, this is no different to a school, but we do have we've essentially created like a waiting list to say, yes, you can give us your name, and as soon as we know what the process is, and we know that what we've set up is going to be approved, then we'll move forward. But you're right, we need to feel confident that we can sign that piece of paper, because of course this isn't just a legal document. This is something we have to sign that would maintain our status as educators, as teachers. It's quite big. So we need to make sure that we are following everything to the absolute letter. And yeah, I completely agree with you. I want my private candidates, but yeah, go on, carry on.
I have a question from a tutor's point of view, which actually came up just whilst you guys were talking. I know that there'll be some tutors who'll be watching this thinking, so in the off-core document, it says that, and I'll summarise because I don't know the wording, but that they don't expect you to have covered the whole syllabus. So I know that I have private candidates, they're with school, but if they were private, that maybe I would I stop tutoring them and new stuff and focus on reviewing the old stuff in order to mean that they are then sufficiently prepared? Or do we keep going as though it is normal? Where do people sit on that? Because as somebody who tutors both in school and out of school students, there's quite a difference in what some of the schools are doing, and indeed what some of my pupils are doing, as to whether they think that they should have stopped or they should be keeping going.
A similar question is being asked in schools at the moment as well, particularly when the schools have been closed and remote learning was not as rigorous, or wasn't provided. In schools, they haven't covered the curriculum in a lot of cases. Both last year and this year, the exam boards haven't released an exact percentage saying you have to have completed, 70% or 80% or something like that. What they have said is that the students should have covered the course and the syllabus sufficiently to continue their studies. So again, the exact wording is not that, I've written it somewhere, but whether or not they release further details and they have an exact percentage, I don't know whether or not they will do that. So I think that that will be down to the individual centre, and I can very much see centres, particularly distance learning providers, where they've had students working with them over a period of time, saying you have to have completed 75% of assignments, or you have to have completed 80% of the units. I can see them doing that, and I can understand why, because in their mind that's sufficient. But again, we're waiting for guidance on that from Exam Board.
Absolutely, I reiterate that it will be down to the individual centres. From a perspective of why they've said there's no minimum, that would be down to the fact that a lot of schools close, but they don't know how many year groups were sent home or how often. So to say you have to have covered X number, that could actually take an entire school out of being able to provide a GCSE grade. However, there is potentially an argument there to say if you are home educated and you have been at home, where is the break in your education? Now, obviously, we know they've been impacted, but have they been impacted in the same way where you've sort of been suddenly removed from your classroom? I don't know. So that, I think that's why they've put that minimum in there. Whether we get guidance or not, I don't know. I think we'll just have to ask the centres and wait for them to actually confirm that. But I would definitely, if you're not sure, as a tutor, talk to the exam centres that your students are working with and ask.
Yeah, I know for us, we're keeping going because our students that have been home educated with us the whole way through, and ultimately we want them to be as best prepared as they can if they wanted to move on from GCSE to A level or from A level to university. So for us, that's part of the education. But I just thought that there might be some people out there having that question in mind.
I don't think you'd be the only one. So we're doing the same thing for distance learning. We're carrying on because it is distance learning, but for our students who are who've moved from school to maybe being home educated, or we're supporting them at school, it's a very, very different story.
There are also lots of students who have completed the entire course because they sat last year, like reset students. So then the question is, well, how much of the course do they have to cover now or revise and go back on in preparation for the assessment?
Yeah, certainly from like the IGCSE standpoint, I quite like the way they've put that out and said, although you might not have covered the whole course, you have to be assessed for the number of hours that you would have sat an exam. So I think they've said 3 pieces of substantial work, and substantial essentially means it needs to be of that length of time. So certainly, bizarrely, for the first time I think ever, I feel more confident with IGCSE than I do with everything else.
And just to confirm, Holly, is that both Cambridge and Edexcel, or was that just the Cambridge IGCSE?
That is for Cambridge. Edexcel have their own guidance, which they have published, and I believe they are updating again in line with Ofqual. Okay, right, so we've gone through private candidates. I'm just keeping an eye on where Claire is in terms of, I can't see your little...
Next slide.
Next slide, oh no! I'm on slide 5.
Yeah. The other candidates that I work with who are private candidates, but we don't necessarily teach, are those that complete their non-examined assessments with Rose Education Consultancy. So we've been doing this for a few years, originally with Tutors and Exams, as authenticating their private candidates and coursework. But since then, we've been working with other assessment centres as well, who've gone, hey, this is great for private candidates. So that involves working with a candidate over a period of time. It follows the process that's outlined on our website in terms of authentication, which means spending a minimum number of time with them. We supervise, so I would never call it tutoring these, because we don't tutor, but we do supervise the production of the coursework over a period of time. And we're also able to grade those candidates because as part of that, a part of that process, we do tutor them and kind of help them with other areas of the syllabus as well. So like exam prep or past papers, as kind of a bit of a freebie. So we've already gone through that with them, but we've already, they've already submitted to us past paper style questions and things like that they've completed, so that we're able to then help them with their NEA in terms of thinking, okay, well, but before we begin, we need to first have a look at what you've studied already, or what skills you need to complete. So that's just another group that we can do straight away.
Yes, absolutely.
That's a little bit about me. Sorry, this slide was the one that I sent to assessment centres to get approved. So
it works really well. It works really well. No, because I kind of followed you into that. It says authentication of NEAs. And
I can do all that is because of previous roles that I've had. So if you go on to the next slide that says about me, I can see this from lots of different perspectives, because I've worked in a school in charge of exams and assessments, and I've been that person who has to sign off and say, yes, I can guarantee that, or to the best of my knowledge, this is the work of the student, and it has been graded accuracy when it comes to non-examined assessment. I've also seen it from an exam board perspective, in terms of making sure at exam board level that the schools have submitted the work. So I work for an exam board now, and I've worked for exam boards in the past, so I can also see from their perspective like what is needed to authenticate the work and make sure that it is rigorous and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's an important message to actually give to parents when we're getting those questions in of why does a tutor need to assess rather than providing evidence. The tutors that are assessing these grades are generally either they've worked with the exam boards, or they are teachers, or both, or heads of department, and it is and also one step removed, because even as just like an exam marker, you actually have to say who your students are, and also if any of your children are taking this, and you would never be able to mark that particular thing for them. So there is always going to be a separation. There is less of a separation when we're assessing our own students, but certainly you would never be allowed to assess your own child. I'm not disappointed by that. I'm not sure I want to assess my son.
Even at exam board level, I have to declare the schools I've worked at in the past, the schools I currently work at, the schools I work with. There's a whole list of things that I have to do to make it fair, because otherwise that'd be corrupt. But so I have to do all of that anyway. And then in terms of other quality assurance that I have kind of as a tutor, I'm a member of different groups and societies, and the tutors that work for me also, they're just the next couple of slides, they're also tutors who either have qualified teacher status, and therefore they're registered with the Department for Education because they'll have a teacher number, or they are an established tutor in business and have been for quite some time. So all of our supervisors and mentors, for instance, are either qualified teachers or examiners, or I have one exception, but they have ran a tutoring business for a number of years, and I've worked with them and know who they are. So it's not some random person.
Not a random person off the street going, come and assess our children. So we've talked about that Claire's worked for exam boards. I've worked for exam boards. Jemma, we've not dragged you into this one. Give us a little bit of background about your background, because we know it's fascinating, but people are watching.
Oh, so actually, I suppose I'm the one with the least schooling experience. I actually rely quite a lot on my tutors. Some of my tutors are past examiners, and some of my tutors are question paper writers. And the only tutors that we are putting forward for private candidates are qualified teachers. So again, they've got qualified teacher status, and either examiners or exam paper writers. So in terms of, again, quality assurance, that was something that was kind of important to us, because for me, I'm a qualified teacher. I did my PGCE at Oxford. I did my teaching practice there, but that's pretty much where my experience ends, and instead I went very much into the tutoring side, and I work with students all over the world who are studying for IGCSEs or GCSEs, and I help students who are entering the UK system, whether that's for school or whether that's mini for university. But for private candidates, kind of the important part is actually for us is our tutors, and making sure that they have the right quality assurance, as Claire said, to make sure that when a student is coming to us, they are getting the same treatment as though they were in a school, in terms of having somebody assess who has that right background.
Yeah, I think we certainly have a lot of responsibility to the candidates themselves to make sure that they're graded accurately, and that their work is taken into consideration, and that they're graded fairly and to get the grade that they deserve. And I mean that in its literal sense, like not too generous, not too harsh, but the one that they deserve. And I think that hopefully our processes are rigorous enough to do that. I think it's quite important.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we forget that when you go through that exam marking system, you do get given a lot of training, and that training happens every year. So every time you go into that process, you are being monitored. There's quality assurance there, and certainly from the EDA side of things, even when you mark something, you're also going to have internal moderation. And I tend to pass mine over to another one of my tutors who is writing exam papers, who is a chief examiner, and I know won't hold back. Also, and I think that's important.
When we say moderation and standardization, we mean the actual sense, not moderated as in moved up or down. Moderation basically means like getting a group of teachers, it happens within schools, group of teachers together and saying, how are you marking? How would you mark it? I was doing it this afternoon in the staff room for a piece of assessed work. So it's two teachers or two working together and making sure that it's standardized across the school. And I think this year, a lot of schools are already, and centres looking to standardise across centres as well, which is a step further than last year, which is reassuring.
Absolutely.
Okay, so talking of last year, last year I was involved, I was brought in by Tutors and Exams last year to act as one of their approved tutors. So they had a huge list. We were talking earlier about needing to know the tutor that was giving the grade and making sure that they were the right person. And they had a list of approved tutors who they'd worked with before and knew. And so I was brought in to do that. And we, the centre received, for their process, they received, what's the word? Approval?
Approval. It was very outright approval from Qual, yes.
For the exam boards, and I counted various subjects because I've taught and examined various subjects, which I think was helpful. But as well as that, I also worked with other assessment centres, schools and colleges, so they could have a process as well. Now, obviously, it was different to each centre. But what upset me most last year was that, there were so many private candidates that were dumped at the last level. And with my head of centre hat on, I can understand why, if the school or the college thought that there wasn't any evidence or, there was no official process for doing it. So I can understand from that, because it's their legal responsibility at the end of the day to say, yes, this is definitely the right grade, and I know that it's the work of the student. But that's why we've been campaigning and working on this for the past year, really, because, all of those private candidates last year that didn't get grades.
Absolutely, and we knew that this was potentially coming. So with that sort of bearing that in mind, one of the things that we did for the Tutors Learning Network was to make sure that we had, and I'm just going to scroll up really quickly, we had a course in place which is sort of a generalisation of how to assess. So it's not any one particular centre's version. This actually came from me working with a number of number of different centres last year, and I pulled all the best practice and all the things that went quite well. So we do have that. We do have also Tutors and Exams who joined us a couple of weeks ago. I want to say weeks, all the days are blurring together. They actually joined us for a fabulous session, which was meant to be an hour, ended up being about an hour and a half. With lots and lots of information. So that is currently on the website. So there is a webinar from Tutors and Exams where they've given out everything they knew at the time. And there is also one on there which is to create tutor assessed grades, and that is a generalized approach. So it's not exactly how to do it. It's not potentially how every centre is going to do it, but it's a bit of support. And one thing that I would say is, if you are going to do assess grades, is also have a look at the GDPR course. Just because data protection is going to be so important at this stage, data protection, especially around exams, expect your centres to ask you to sign non-disclosure agreements. There should be a contract in place if you are going to be working with them.
Just as from a tutor perspective as well, make sure that if you are a private tutor and it's your full-time business, that you have the right insurances in place.
Yes, the two standard ones. Make sure you have indemnity, make sure you have public liability. Okay, so we have the DfE standard approach.
Onto this year. So they have released a little bit of information, the Ofqual and DfE at the moment. And this is what we know. So this was released at the end of their consultation period. In some ways it's helpful, and in some ways it's actually quite reassuring. For instance, I'll pull just a few things out of it in a moment. But at the same time, that tiny bit at the bottom left-hand side there, private candidates to work with a school, college or exam centre to provide evidence, is like, it leaves a whole collection of questions there still to go. But this is what we can gather from it. Now, this is aimed at schools, but I'm going to try and interpret as best I can some of the things that are in there. So the overview of the approach outlined by the Department for Education. First of all, the grades are awarded and determined by teachers. That's what they said, by your teacher, I think, is on the one that's to students. Now, the term teachers in our case still applies, because all but one of our tutors are qualified teachers. And I would even argue that, private tutors that don't have QTS are still teachers as well. They're teaching. And the fact that they'll be able to draw on a range of evidence is also reassuring, of course. The question is, how do they verify that evidence? So you'll see how I've decided to do that a bit later. What's quite revealing to me is this next bit. Candidates should only be assessed on what they've been taught. Now, I interpreted that to mean what they've covered and what they've learned, as well as a private candidate. So that bit is kind of like, well, I've already heard stories that, private candidates panicking, saying there'll be full mocks, or exam centres saying they'll be running full mocks and so on. If that's the case, then I would contact the exam centre and say, what aspect, if you're a private tutor and you have a private candidate, maybe write to the school and say, this is what we've covered so far. Is this sufficient? And, will you, they should adapt the mock exams for that. If you think about it as well, in school, many students have already had mock exams. They had them in November in some circumstances in anticipation of lockdown. But the teachers know what has been taught, and therefore they can set a mock exam based on that. That gets complicated when you have thousands of private candidates, but either there should be a choice, maybe. Again, we don't know what process is going to be announced before the end of March, apparently. But in our case, like, we're speaking to the students about what they've been taught. I don't know what you're doing, Jemma, for that bit.
So for us, because we've been working with each of our students, they have reports every time they're done. So we know exactly what topics have been covered, which makes it easy for us. And again, reflecting back onto, are we taking new students? That's part of the reason we're not at the moment, because we don't know what they've covered. There may well be a way to find that out, but until we know more information, that's kind of what's holding us back.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we are in a very similar position for distance learning for one-to-one students. It's nice and easy because we know what they've done. What we have said to our students who have requested that we assess them is bear with us, we'll find out, but we assume it will be the same process as with parity with schools to say, what have you covered? We don't know what that percentage is. There a minimum percentage? Let's hope we find out. And this is why we have said, yes, we'll take you onto the books, but we won't actually run any form of assessment until we have something in writing.
The other two pieces of evidence as well. I'm on slide 12, Holly, by the way. Doing my best impression there of a government minister. What they've said about NEA and the optional additional materials. So NEA won't be moderated by exam boards this year, just for those that kind of unaware of the NEA process. They would be standardised and moderated in school. Then the school would send off the samples or the marks to the exam board, and the exam boards would then standardise and moderate the work as well. If one school had been too generous in their marking of coursework, then it would be reduced, and if they'd been too harsh, it would be increased, that kind of thing. I'm pleased to say that my grades have never been changed. But the advice is that candidates should continue to complete it if they can, and because coursework is such an integral part of a lot of the courses, teachers are saying in the most, from the ones I've spoken to, that they will mark it and it will contribute to their overall grade. It won't be based on it entirely, but the only difference is that this year the exam boards won't moderate it, so that process won't be there. The optional additional materials, or the OMS, as we're going to call them, are going to be released around Easter, I think, is the timetable that the DFE have given. Nobody knows what these are going to be yet, but we can use them to help us use our judgments. Now, for private candidates, I would argue that these are particularly important. The issue as a tutor and as a private tuition centre or as a private education centre, whatever, is that we don't know what these will look like. So being able to plan, I've had candidates call up and say, how much will it be to mark additional assessment materials so that I can use them as evidence? And I have to say to them, well, we don't know what they look like. So it's very difficult for me as somebody who manages tutors and private tutors and assessment to work out that process, which is also another reason why at this stage I haven't said what a process will be for any new candidates. For the candidates that currently work with us, the private candidates that the groups that work, the other educated that work with us at the moment, this is more straightforward because this is just any other. We've already done past paper questions with them, and we can just incorporate this into the teaching in April and May when it comes out. So that's not so much of an issue for them in terms of cost because we'd be working with them anyway.
Yeah, and the other thing to be aware of is that they are optional. So we then need to find out as tutors whether they have a higher weighting, even if they're optional. And obviously for IGCSE, now whether that is CIE or Edexcel, there are no additional materials. It is purely past papers. So when we talk about the optional additional materials, these are for just the UK qualifications. Just sort of clarification for those people who are typing in the throat, oh, where are these ones? That we won't be getting them for international GCSE or A level. They will be past paper only.
Jemma, what's your feeling about these additional?
So at the moment, the way that our process is set, we've got this kind of in-class, what you've produced assessment, which, given that we've got our students who have been with us for a year, should be fairly okay, and that's going to be backed up by those pieces of evidence, just to make sure, again, dot all the I's and cross all the T's. We're then going to be doing a mock exam, date to be confirmed, because one of the things we don't know with this is really, or I don't know if you guys do, is dates and when things need to be in and all of those. So there's a bit of uncertainty. Holly's kind of giving me faces. Does Holly know something I don't?
Sort of. So I've been given dates, but of course they could move around. I do know for IGCSE it's the 1st of May that we need to provide the evidence. I've been given the 14th of May for the rest of them. That's A level and GCSE as well. The feedback obviously from a lot of students has been, oh, but my teachers at school have been able to have until June. Well, we do have until June, but you also have to moderate them, so you have to have that conversation. You have to have the quality assurance. So therefore there needs to be a point at which you get a cut off to give us time to market, to give them time to market. And that's the reason why those earlier deadlines appear to be sort of popping up everywhere else. But it does look like sort of mid-May when the GCSEs would have started anyway. So that would have given them up to the point at which they would have been studying.
Even in school, I would argue that they're not going to leave it to the very last minute, because standardization needs to occur. They need to bring together all of the evidence that they've got, and that's going to take a couple of weeks, even in a school. And with private candidates, that process is almost once removed, because they need to come to me first as as Rose Education Consultancy. Then I need to send that to the centre, who then need to check and make sure that my evidence is there.
So just to clarify, because again, I know that people will be watching this, are the centres moderating? We've mentioned moderating a lot. We've mentioned the coursework moderation not happening. If you are a private tutor, if you are a company that is internally moderating, because I know that in terms of best practice, that's what we will be looking at. When you send your work into an exam centre, will they then be moderating it?
I would think that the additional materials gives an opportunity for them to moderate with a mark scheme like a normal exam. But in terms of past work, they don't know. I mean, you as the professional, I suppose, understand that work better. Does that make sense?
I think I would worry about working with an exam centre where they didn't have a form of quality assurance there.
Yes.
So rather than moderation, I think quality assurance is going to be the word we should be using.
Yeah.
If your process is rigorous enough as a tutor, then there won't be a problem. Yeah. Okay. Shall I move on to the process? So thanks, Holly. So this is our process for existing candidates at the moment. We're saying that they must have completed at least a certain percentage of their course. So I have set a percentage, but it differs according to the course. Just simply because, for example, if they usually would have 3 papers and they've sat 2 of those, they've covered the content of 2, then it would be, I have to think about that. So it depends on the subject and it depends on the students and how much they have done. That might change if the exam boards come out and say they must have completed a certain amount. But to be honest, most of the candidates are quite a way through anyway, and certainly by April, May, they would have been ready to sit their exams. So we're just continuing as we would normally. We're going to use that portfolio of work as evidence for their grade, but it's not assessed as such. So we're not going to say, well, we'll give you an A because of that work that you've done. But it would be used to support other work, so more work that can be verified. So if they have past work that's completed under exam conditions, it's been timed, it's been supervised, and let's say it's a past paper, and they got an A star, then I'm definitely going to be using that paper for evidence, because I'd be a bit silly not to. And the same for their NEA. If they've already completed it and it's already been standardised by the centre, like either by me or by the centre, then of course I would probably use that. I am going to introduce mock exams, probably around March, April time, but they're not full exams. They'll be remotely invigilated and they'll be adapted to the candidate. And that's just so that for my own peace of mind that I know where they're working at. And if I need to, I'll use the optional additional materials I'm thinking at the moment at least one piece, but again, it's working with the students that we already work with, and that'll be around April, May time. So that's kind of just to support. And then there, I've got at least 3 verified, whatever the word that they use was, substantial pieces of work.
Yes.
And they're verified. And it's not just from my perspective as somebody who wants to make sure that, oh, it's definitely the candidate's work. It's not a case of checking. It's also as much opportunity as possible for those candidates to show and prove their grade as well. So.
And from our perspective, if we have a candidate that's joined us maybe this year, who had a tutor previously, and they wanted to submit work that they had done with that tutor, I'm going to throw the question out there because, of course, we don't know. Again, we're going to have to talk to our exam centres, because we may well say yes or we may say no, but ultimately it may not well be up to us. It may well be go to your exam centre. That would be my answer. What advice would you give to parents, students who wanted to use that? I'm going to pick on you first, Claire.
Question, sorry, it's Friday night and my dyslexic brain's going nutty.
So oh yes, so there we go. So you have a student, this is your scenario, you have a student who you've been working with for a short time, that you have been working with them, but they had a private tutor before. They want to use some of that work from that private tutor as part of their assessment.
Well, a lot of my candidates this year had not just a tutor last year, but had a school last year. A lot of them don't want to speak to the school if they felt that they were undergraded last year. However, if they've completed, this was the case for coursework this year, where if they've completed their coursework and had it marked and verified and already authenticated by a school or by a teacher, then I didn't want to make them do it all again, just so that I could watch them do it. That seemed a bit weird. So what I have been doing for the NEA this year is working with, if they've completed it in school. If they've done it since then obviously that's a little bit different. Although most of them just wanted to do it again anyway, so they wanted to write from scratch. But I think that would be my advice. If they had a private tutor that wasn't, for example, an approved tutor or wasn't a learning partner of the exam centre in particular, I think I'd definitely speak to that tutor and find out what they'd done. I might think about getting that tutor to sign something, but again, as a business with my, self-checking head on, I'd want to make sure that what was the experience of that tutor, and I'd probably get them to sign something similar to an authentication form for coursework. I would take it into consideration, but I definitely would want to use a mock exam and their optional additional materials. As an examiner, it's quite easy to see. I guess I teach humanities subjects like English and geography and history, so it's easy to find the voice of the student in a piece of writing. I know this doesn't work for science, sorry Jemma, but comparing the two together. So if they got, let's say they were on the border between an A and B in a mock exam, but then the tutor who I'd checked with and talked to and went through the various checks, they'd done an assessment as well and they'd got an A for that, then I'd be like, oh, okay, I think I would be convinced enough to award it. Like, I think that would convince me, but I'd want other information as well, just for my own benefit.
I think for me, we've got the time to do the mock exam. We've got the time to do the additional assessments. So that is 2 big substantial pieces. And that's the reason that I am doing those mock exams, is because it's something that I can therefore moderate and I can look at and I can ensure. I think if they had evidence that matched what I was seeing in those, then definitely I'd consider it. But it wouldn't be the thing that I would hang my grade on, because I want to, and it's not that you don't trust the other tutor, it's nothing of that. It's that you, as a business, and making sure that these students get the right grades as well, because it's important for them to make it as rigorous as possible, means that the person who's giving out the grade needs to be the person who's seeing the work. So for me, I might consider it, but it would really, I'd be pushed, because I think I probably could get 3 substantial pieces of evidence elsewhere. And I think that's, especially at this point now, we've got a couple of months, I can probably get those 3 pieces of evidence, and I can ensure that I've looked at them, and I can ensure that they're internally checked, and that's something that's a lot more comfortable for me than an unknown tutor who's not with me.
Yes, absolutely. So we talked previously when we've done the webinars about academic honesty, and needing to put our names to things. So and I think you're right. Part of that academic honesty is that the person who is awarding the grade is the person who's actually seen that work.
Yeah,
Fab.
I agree.
Thank you.
Now, one thing that we touched upon earlier was a proposed process for new candidates. And if you see this slide, you'll see I've left it blank. I have the same as Jemma has, what I'm calling a standby process that's ready to go out the same day. So if they say, the centres aren't going to do this. However, I'm hoping, and I think that there will be a process in place for candidates that are not with a learning partner, don't have a tutor, and have literally got no evidence at all so far. So they were going to go to the exam, sit, and this happens quite a lot, go to the exam, sit the exam, and do it then. The biggest, like I said, one of the concerns is that the additional assessment materials, we don't know any details about them yet, but I would assume that they could be used. They could also use mock exams. Again, you'd have to ensure that the candidate was only assessed on what they'd covered, what they'd been taught. But again, if mocks are held in April time, or the additional assessment material certainly, that's around the time, late April, early May is the time that they probably would have finished the course anyway. So I think I would be wondering why the student hadn't completed. But like you said, like they've also been affected by coronavirus as well. But we have a proposed process, just as the Education Hotel do. It's ready to go, and it won't cost thousands of pounds like I've seen in some places. Yeah, we'll keep it as cost effective as we can. I did have a question last year, like, why are you charging for this process? And a simple question is that teachers don't work for free. And I that's quite a horrible thing to say. But I have to pay my tutors for their time and for their marking and for the work that they do. But even in a school this year, I'm wondering, if the schools take on additional candidates, external candidates, what their process will be in terms of paying for that.
It's a very good question. Jemma?
Just a point, I suppose we are referring all the time to mock exams, and there will be some tutors watching who are going, what mock exams can I put in front of somebody? Is there this special mock exam that exists? Where are we getting those from? And I know that there'll be some tutors who will be thinking, well, surely my student has prepared lots of mock exams. We've been doing those past papers from 2017, 2018. So what am I testing them on?
I would say speak to the centre. They might, you never know, the centres might turn around and say, right, we want your student to sit the same mock exam as our students.
And there is also the 2020 locked papers.
Absolutely.
Ooh. Right, so there's very clear legal ramifications, to say the least, of using locked papers. As a tutor, even as a teacher in a school, if you're a teacher in a school, you're licensed, your school is licensed to use those locked papers. The school will have a license to use them by the exam board. If you, even as a teacher, let's say you tutor part-time in evenings, if you take one of those papers that are locked and give it to your private tutee, you're already breaking the law and possibly you're breaking the licensing contract of your school. So I'd be very, very wary of that. The only exception would be if the centre said, please use this locked, and they give you it as part of their grading process for private candidates. That's the only way that I would use it.
Yeah, so absolutely. So the only mock which is safe or using past papers would be where you approach the exam centre and they say, we want you to take it from a variety of papers, including this one, and they actually hand it to you for that specific purpose. Now, of course, it's entirely likely that may happen. One thing, obviously, we have to be really careful of, we don't give out the mark scheme, because that sort of makes a mockery of the whole thing. Any student that approaches me to say, oh, my teacher's been doing this, would you go through this particular paper with me? If it's a 2021 at the moment, I'm just stepping away from it. But that said, if they want tutors to run these ones, it's entirely likely they will give us the 2020 papers, or they will give us the additional materials, but at the moment we simply don't know. So
that has to come from the centre, though.
Yeah.
Just even as a private tutor as well, you're breaking so many copyright and licensing laws to use those if they're behind the little padlocks on.
They are locked for a reason.
They are locked for a reason, exactly. There's nothing to stop us from creating similar but different from older years. So, for me, I'm using maths and computing as an example. Maths is probably a little easier because change the numbers. But for computing, I'm so sorry, maths tutors. But for computing, obviously, we do have that area, but we also have the essays. So you ask a similar question, bring in a different topic, or bring in a different scenario, and that would be enough. You could use similar mark schemes, so it's a lot of work.
Same for history, geography, or the humanities subjects, English.
Yeah.
Change the character or change the theme that you ask the question about.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming you have to keep it of a similar difficulty. So, for example, within English, there are easier characters, to analyse. Everyone remembers that weird Macbeth paper where they asked that silly question. I'm sure that no one's going to be picking like the gardener, but it should be of a similar difficulty.
It should be of a similar. So we used to use the phrase for what is now NEA's was coursework, similar but different, which OCR actually now put into their official guidance that you mustn't give them similar but different. So apparently we've coined a phrase. Okay, so you have some considerations
Yes,
you
this
put in
is
place.
just kind of my thoughts and what I've shared with my staff, the tutors and mentors and so on. But it's really considerations for us as private tutors as well, really. We need to, have this approach that's flexible. We need to think about the different subjects. So, how we assess for maths is going to be different to how we assess for English or an essay-based subject. And I know that you've got on your course, that's included on your course, where you give advice on grading and what sort of things to include in your basket of evidence. I also think that we need to continue working together, all of us as private tutors. It really bothers me that I don't want private candidates disadvantaged because they're a private candidate. I'm quite lucky this year in the sense that I work in a school and I work with private candidates, so I can kind of assess the situation from both perspectives. I think that we need to keep this real balanced approach, but at the same time, there is that extra layer for private candidates that we need to make sure that they are accurately assessed, and also that they're given the right opportunities. So parity, but also fairness, and I think that that's just as important for those private candidates who were sitting exams this year. Nobody wants to think that well, there could be the possibility of somebody who's, well, quite frankly, cheated their way into the system, because that would just undermine your own grade. So
no, absolutely. We talk an awful lot about equity rather than equality. And for private candidates, you know, equity is going to be really, really important. There are certain things that they will need more assistance with. There'll be certain things they don't need more assistance with. And obviously anything that we do in terms of assessment, we must make sure that we are providing them with all of the concessions that they would normally have.
that's very important.
Okay. I love how many slides you've created.
Sorry,
This is
just,
it's wonderful. It's like watching one of my PowerPoints. This is lovely.
like I said, I just put like everything from about 5 different documents that I've been using over the past week. This was just a side note I wanted to make about funding. Another reason that I haven't at the moment said I'll take on new candidates or confirmed a process for candidates that I'm not already working with. Last year, private candidates had to pay extra to be assessed. This was unavoidable. Unfortunately, in some very sad cases, it led to some exploitation. Certainly not with the exam centres that I used though. But you know, tutors do need to pay for their time. But ideally, you know, there should be a fund for this. I wonder if there is a fund for this, even in schools. Like, who's going to pay the teachers to take on extra marking that's outside of their contracted hours for external candidates? So
I'm not sure I want to go near that argument.
I'm sure the unions will do that job for us. It'll be fine. But yeah, so you know, this year, that's why what I wouldn't want to do is say, well, I'll charge students this much per subject and I'll assess you and go through that, you know, take them on as one of my own, to then have the DFE turn around next week or the week after and say, well, this is the process for private candidates and it's free. I don't think that wouldn't sit very well with me.
No. We've been quite open in terms of our official rate per hour, but whether that's charged directly to the parent, to the student, we simply don't know. I do know, obviously, with the Department of Education, they initially, when they published everything, when they had the off-qual guidance, they said that private candidates wouldn't be charged anything extra, and within 12 hours that just mysteriously disappeared from the website, and it said they will not be disadvantaged.
Yes.
So I do think there's probably a word of warning for any private candidates who are listening, who are maybe seeing large fees. And I know that there's candidates who've contacted me who've said, you know, I'm prepared to pay this fee. You shouldn't be, because the process should be set up so that you do not have to pay thousands of pounds in order to get your grades. And I know that there's candidates who last year they didn't take it, and then the resit, the kind of November exams, they weren't ready to take it, or they couldn't sit it because the exam centres, they were really, you know, they're waiting on a year. And I know it's frustrating, and sometimes you feel like you know, I'd pay anything to get my grade, but really the process needs to be right, and there is, as you can see, there is this work that's going on behind the scenes that's trying to get this process sorted. And I suppose it is a warning to private candidates around large fees of money attached to the idea of getting a grade is something I'd steer quite clear of.
Absolutely, and I would say, sort of an addition to that, is that if we do have parents or private candidates who are watching this and they're feeling that the fees that they are being quoted don't sit well with them, or it doesn't feel right, you know, please do get in contact with the Tutors Learning Network. Send us a message, because we do have a large amount of tutors who are working with this, and we can give you the sort of, is that an average amount that you're being, is it extortionate, is it going to be sort of, this is what actually everybody else is being charged.
I would also say, look what you're getting for your money. I can understand that there are some centres or tutoring companies or whatever that are charging this much because their intention is to teach and to tutor students between now and April. So, if it's a few £100, and it works out as £25 per hour, but you're getting, 30 hours of tutoring between now and the exam, then it would obviously be worth it. Well, it's up to you, but I would just say hold off, and don't think I'm going to have to pay out thousands in addition to the assessments. We're all working on this together, and like I said, we do have a standby process just in case, and we're working to make it as cheap as possible, but still pay minimum wage.
Absolutely, we have to pay the tutors. Our poor tutors, they're lovely, but they aren't going to work for free. So we need to support both, but to charge above and beyond what you would usually charge is simply not fair.
Don't feel pressured into it. I think. Especially because nobody knows what the process is yet. Like I said, I can understand some places saying, okay, we'll take you on as one of our, if you enroll with us now, and then they charge their usual fee for what would be 2 months of being with them, then that's understandable.
Yes, so I think the general consensus there is, if it feels wrong, talk to somebody else. Don't necessarily write them off, but definitely ask other people, talk to other tutors, see what is actually happening, and fingers crossed that there is some funding there.
And I suppose on the back of that, exam centres, dates wise, because I know that there's almost a kind of feeling of panic amongst some private candidates, because some exam centres have deadlines that are coming up fairly soon. And I've seen definitely on Facebook chats of people saying, well, they are closing their doors, but they haven't told us what's going on. And I'm paying for, because you pay the exam centre, but I don't know necessarily what I'm going to be doing, and that is definitely a source of stress. I wonder what you are advising students who come to you who aren't with you, but who are going through that at the moment.
I would say that even just today, or certainly this week, some assessment centres have said that they won't apply late fees if you register. I think it's like around the 1st of April, maybe.
It's the 1st of April. I know tutors and exams have set a deadline of the 1st, but I believe that the reason for that one is actually because of the sheer volume of candidates they've got. And it's not because they're just cutting them off and saying no more. They simply have so many. Home educating has gone up by something like 400% in the last 12 months. And this is the outcome. But my suggestion to most students is register. Somebody will support you, but just go with a recommendation. If you're not being recommended by a tutor, go and talk to the home educating community, because they will give you answers. And talk to people whose children have been through it before. Claire, would you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that makes sense. Recommendations, and trust your instinct, and don't panic.
Yes, don't panic. Don't panic is a big one.
Although that's easier said than done at the moment. I am aware of that. I just included a couple of information. I was just very quickly searching today. So it says here, look, Pearson, the DfE is currently exploring ways to make sure there are affordable opportunities to work with centres. So we'll see what that materialises, how that materialises. A list of centres will be provided, and like I said, the deadline, late fees won't be applied. I think I read that somewhere. So if a centre is charging a late fee, then work out which ones are and which ones aren't, and just look at their deadlines.
Yeah, and it's unlikely that the exam boards are charging late fees past, well, certainly not through March. So if they're being passed on to you in March from an exam centre, that's the exam centre's admin, not the exam board cost being passed on.
Yes. And then I also looked at AQA. I was thinking about what they've got the least on there. We'll give you clear guidance, but it doesn't say when. The OCR at least says by the end of March, as did Pearson EdXL. So they're the big three. Obviously, there's the Welsh Board and various others as well. And quite reassuring here that there's a flexible approach to support your entries as well. And again, by the end of March, they're going to provide guidance to both schools and to private exam centres as well. I just included some various documents. Sorry, again,
all of these links. What we will do is once we finish with the live, I will take all of these links and I will pop them at the end of the live, so you'll have them in the comments. And when we publish this on YouTube afterwards, we'll make sure those links are also there and available.
That was just my bibliography when this was a different topic. So on to my final piece of advice then. First of all, as a tutor and as a candidate, speak to the assessment centre in the first instance. Like, everything has to come from them, everything has to be approved by them, and that goes for the process and everything. Be flexible, because there's still announcements to be made, either by the DFE, Ofqual, or the awarding bodies, that's the exam board. Just a reminder not to use any locked or restricted materials, please. It's against the law anyway. And unlike last year, there will be a process for private candidates this year. So I think it's quite important for tutors to kind of reassure their students with that. And then the final one is just in terms of professional to professional, so the tutors, just check your insurances. In terms of quality assurance as well, you might want to make sure that they're in place.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Well, we have quite a lot going on there. I've been keeping an eye on the kind of things that have been going on with us. We haven't had an awful lot of questions which on the live, so I've pulled what we can through, and certainly for those that have come through from previous questions before we went live. So thank you so much for giving up your time this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure. I know it's Friday night. We should be relaxing towards the weekend, but I'm pretty sure that none of us are going to be doing that for the foreseeable future. However, thank you very much for giving up your time to talk to everybody. And if you do have any more questions, if there's anything from this video that you want more information on, then please do get in contact. We will make sure that there are links that go with all of the videos, and over the next few weeks, as we get more information, we will absolutely be publishing it on the Tutors Learning Network website, either through the blog, on the Facebook page, in our Facebook group for tutors, and generally across every platform we can get hold of. Super stuff. Thank you so much. And I'm going to say goodnight to everybody on here.
Thank you.
And we're down. I was looking for the button and going, no, it's